Welcome to On The Money Line, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome, and I'm here to break down UFC Columbus, which is headlined by a heavyweight headliner just like last weekend with UFC London. This time we've got Curtis Blaydes versus Chris Daukaus. Just before we get into the breakdowns, though, as always, I'm going to be breaking down from an AI perspective the recap from last weekend at UFC London. Once again, there was a couple of good gems in there that I want to talk about and some other stuff as well. So as always, that's going to be a separate video on the YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/MMA Play 365. So make sure you check in to that Blaydes AI recap from UFC London last weekend. But we jump straight into the breakdowns right now in the heavyweight division in the main event, Curtis Blaydes versus Chris Daukaus. Now this fight is so important in the heavyweight division, especially considering what we've just seen last weekend with Tom Aspinall now making a claim for being at the top of the division. He's going to have a title fight at some point. So if these two heavyweights want to be in that mix, they've got to win this fight. So it's actually a really big heavyweight fight. I like Chris Daukaus. I think his boxing's good. I think his speed's good. He's actually showing a lot of attributes very similar to Tom Aspinall in regards to being a little bit of a lighter heavyweight, having that speed, that movement in and out of range. But unfortunately in this fight, I think Curtis Blaydes is still a nightmare for most fighters in this division. Obviously not the champion Francis Ngannou that's beaten him twice now. I'll be really interested to see Curtis Blaydes against Tom Aspinall, if I'm being honest. But with this fight right here, I think that Daukaus is definitely going to be the better striker. He's going to be quicker. Blaydes striking isn't really that bad though, but I do think if this was a 25-minute kickboxing fight with Blaydes shooting no takedowns, and Daukaus wins this fight way more often than he loses it. But obviously the wrestling of Curtis Blaydes is definitely going to be something that is paramount in this fight. Curtis Blaydes is going to shoot takedowns, and if he does try and strike with Daukaus, I only think it's a matter of time before Daukaus starts lighting him up that Curtis Blaydes, starts shooting desperately for takedowns. But ultimately that's Curtis Blaydes' game, and he's never had any secrets about that. He's always said that he does what he wants to do in the cage. Everybody knows that he's going to wrestle. He admits he's going to wrestle, but stopping him is a different matter. I think that this fight is going to predominantly take place within the close clinch exchanges, within the wrestling and grappling. Sure, there's going to be some striking. Every fight starts on the feet. Whilst they are striking, Daukaus is going to be getting the better of Curtis Blaydes. But once the wrestling starts coming from Blaydes, it's just going to outweigh anything that happens on the feet. I think the effective striking is going to be much closer than the effective wrestling and grappling. So that's where I see this fight heading. I think Curtis Blaydes, although he's grappling in regards to keeping his opponents down isn't great, the fact that he's relentless and he can do it for 5 rounds, albeit he tires himself out, he will be able to wrestle for at least 3 out of the 5 rounds to be able to win a decision should it go there. If Daukaus does tire late with that pressure from the relentless wrestling, then Blaydes might find himself with a ground and pound opportunity, which we have seen him get opponents out in the past with ground and pound. So that's a possibility for Blaydes. But like I said, in this fight, I think Daukaus is the better striker, but Blaydes' wrestling is going to outweigh anything else that happens in the fight and allow Blaydes to take over the fight the longer it goes on. If Blaydes needs to shoot complete 7, 8, 9, 10 plus takedowns, then he's going to be able to. The wrestling of Curtis Blaydes is a real neutralizer here, and I just think it's going to be too much for Chris Daukaus on the night, so I'm picking Curtis Blaydes to win this fight. And then in the next fight, we've got Joanne versus Aleksei Grasso. This is a fight, in my opinion, that's going to take place. It's going to be won and lost on the feet within the striking. Both women have shown that they can wrestle, and both women have shown that they can grapple as well offensively, and they're not bad defensively either. But in this fight, both, Aleksei Grasso is boxing background, Joanne Muay Thai background. So I think it's going to be a case of both fighters are going to stand on the feet, and who's going to be able to implement the game plan and start taking over the fight. And although the lines are a little bit wide, I do understand why Aleksei Grasso is the favourite in this fight. I think that Aleksei Grasso's got some attributes that Joanne Wood's going to really struggle with. For a start, speed, movement, in and out of range. I'm not saying Joanne Wood's slow, but Aleksei Grasso's really smart with the way she moves into range, lands, exits back out before getting hit with anything, or at least anything with any substance. The danger awareness of Aleksei Grasso is really good. And I think that one issue that I have with Joanne Wood, I do believe that she's lost some fights on the scorecards that she should have won, but what that tells you, she fights really, really close. So in a Joanne Wood fight, it's always going to be relatively close, but even in fights where she should be absolutely lighting her opponents up, she just makes the fights close, and I'm not really sure that I like that about Joanne Wood. Now, you can flip that on its head a little bit and say she fights to the level of her opponent. So because the betting lines are relatively wide in this fight, that there's value on Joanne Wood. But ultimately, I just think that Grasso is going to be able to turn it up when she needs to turn it up. When we're looking at volume, Joanne Wood can definitely land volume for sure. But I think that Aleksei Grasso is going to be the one advancing more than Joanne Wood. I think Grasso is going to land the more effective strikes. So even if Joanne Wood gets up by 10 or 20 strikes over 3 rounds, I think Grasso is going to have landed the more significant action strikes, the more powerful strikes. And I think that's going to definitely weigh in if the fight goes to the scorecards, which I do believe it's going to be. I think Grasso, although the fight is going to be close in moments, I think Grasso is going to slightly edge at least 2 out of the 3 rounds, potentially all 3 rounds. So I'm picking Aleksei Grasso to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a fight that's surely a title contender fight in the flyweight division. We've got Askar Askarov versus Kai Kara-France. And like I say, I think this has got title implications written all over it, but I think it's a difficult fight for Kai Kara-France, if I'm being honest. Askar Askarov, I have faded him a couple of times. I wasn't a believer at the start, but I do think that the more we've seen him, you know, it happens. Sometimes I'm on guys early and, you know, I'm calling them UFC champions, and sometimes it takes a couple of fights. I was the same with Israel Adesanya, but with Askar Askarov, I am starting to see why, you know, he is hyped and why he's, you know, tipped by some people to become the next flyweight champion in the UFC. So he's a difficult fighter to beat. He's a good striker. He's got a good chin on him. He's got good fight IQ. His wrestling's off the charts. His grappling's good. It's very difficult to keep him down. Now with Kai Kara-France, he's got to keep this fight standing. But I don't necessarily think that Kai Kara-France is the better striker in this fight, and he's certainly not the better wrestler, and he's certainly not the better grappler. And this is why Askar Askarov is close to a minus 300 favourite, a 3-1 favourite. And I can totally see why. Like I said, I think the striking's going to be close. You might even be able to argue that Askarov has the edge in the striking, but when it comes to the speed, the cardio, the wrestling, the grappling, Askarov just checks all the boxes here. I think it's going to be a really interesting fight if he gets to fight Deiveson Figueiredo. Even a rematch with Brandon Moreno would be a fantastic fight as well. But right now in this spot, Kai Kara-France has got to be able to not only keep the fight standing, but outland Askarov. He's got to be able to put it on Askarov, land significant strikes. And I just feel that Askarov's going to be game everywhere and probably better everywhere. And I say probably because, like I said, the striking is very close, but the wrestling, the grappling, once that factor comes into the fight and there's takedowns and there's topside control, I think it's Askarov all day long. So I'm picking Askar Askarov to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Matt Brown versus Bryan Barberena. This fight is going to be an absolute war. Both fighters are going to stand in there. They're going to trade. They're going to get hit. They're probably both going to get dropped. I think someone's going to get knocked out if the fight hits the mat. They've both got good jiu-jitsu. Matt Brown's jiu-jitsu is still massively underrated. And I just think it's going to be a phenomenal fight from, you know, a neutral spectator perspective. I think it's a great fight. Like I said, both fighters are going to stand toe-to-toe. They're both going to trade. They're going to be in close quarters. I very highly doubt that the fight is going to be fought at a slow pace. I very highly doubt that one of these fighters is going to try and sit on the outside and try and strike. I think it's going to be a true mixed martial arts fight. I think there's going to be wrestling. I think there's going to be moments in the grappling, but ultimately, I think the fight's going to be won and lost on the feet. Now, although Matt Brown is definitely the more aging fighter, I do think Barberena's on a little bit of a decline himself, and he's not the fighter that's impossible to put away as he used to be. And I actually think Matt Brown's got something for him in this fight. I still think Matt Brown's, from a technical perspective, is solid. I think he's a better technical striker than Barberena. But like I said, it's one of those fights. It's a pick 'em for a reason, because any one of these fighters could just land something and suddenly the fight changes. But it wouldn't shock me if there was one of those wild exchanges where they both throw in, one of them gets dropped, but then comes back hard and drops the other one. It's going to be a good fight, but I am siding with Matt Brown here. Like I said, from a technical perspective, I think Matt Brown still got it, even though his durability might not reflect where his technical aspect is from the striking. I do think that Matt Brown's still got nice elbows. I think he's got nice kicks. I think he's still aggressive. If the fight hits the mat, then I like Matt Brown's jiu-jitsu as well. And like I say, Barberena could definitely land something and put Matt Brown out. But like I said, I think Matt Brown's the more savvy veteran with the better technical strike and the better jiu-jitsu should it hit the mat. And for those reasons, I'm picking Matt Brown to win this fight. And in the next fight, another fun one, we've got Aleksei Oleinik versus Ilir Latifi. Now, what's really interesting in this fight, actually, when I was looking at, you know, the statistics and takedown defense specifically for Latifi, because this is super important if Latifi is going to win this fight, is Latifi's got a 100% takedown defense in the UFC, which is outrageous. No fighter's ever taken Ilir Latifi down. Now, I'm not saying Aleksei Oleinik can't take him down, but it's going to be really difficult. Latifi's got a wrestling background, solid wrestling background, and he's got power in his hands as well. But I was actually a lot higher on Latifi until I watched tape. And actually watching tape, you know, although Aleksei Oleinik's old and he tires and, you know, his durability is a question mark, and his technical striking is definitely not very good. You know, he's winging big bombs, it's very easy to evade. But Ilir Latifi's not exactly a quick fighter that's in and out of range and, you know, rapid around the cage. I think Aleksei Oleinik's going to be able to be very competitive in this fight. It's just, if he can't take Latifi down, I just see Latifi being able to land something across 3 rounds to hurt Oleinik and potentially knock him out. But it took Derek Lewis, the Black Beast, a few times, a few hard shots to put Oleinik out. So this is where I've got a little bit of hesitancy on Latifi. And if Oleinik does get Latifi down, then he could definitely submit him. You know, Latifi's not got much of a neck, but neither did Marc Hunt, and Aleksei Oleinik still choked him out. But even if the neck's not there, an arm, or, you know, there's so many different techniques that Oleinik could use. And like I said, even though Latifi's not got much of a neck, a solid squeeze is still enough to tap an opponent. It's a tough fight for both fighters. Both fighters could definitely have the way, but I am leaning towards Latifi because, you know, numbers don't lie, and Latifi's never been taken down. Aleksei Oleinik, I think, is going to gas himself out a little bit more than usual, trying to take Latifi down. And I just, like I say, I think if this fight stays on the feet, even if Latifi gets taken down in the first round, I don't think he's going to continuously get taken down throughout this fight. It's just whether Aleksei Oleinik could get him out in that first round. I think Latifi is going to be able to keep this fight on the feet long enough to be able to land something hard on Oleinik, whose durability is definitely a massive question mark at the minute. So the pick is Ilir Latifi to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Sara McMann versus Karol Rosa. Again, another interesting fight. The thing is with Sara McMann, she's so skilled in regards to her wrestling. Her wrestling's absolutely solid. She normally has a great first round, but then fades afterwards. But I don't know whether this is just a bias because I'm a real fan of wrestling and MMA, but I just really like Sara McMann, and because of that wrestling prowess, like I said, I just feel that she's got the tools to be able to beat most women in this division. But it's almost a question of what happens in that second round and that third round. Should it go there? Does Karol Rosa throw up her legs and armbar Sara McMann, triangle Sara McMann, or does she start stuffing the takedowns later in the fight? And I definitely think the line's wide for a start. I understand why Karol Rosa might be the favourite, but the line's too wide. I think Sara McMann's going to be able to land takedowns in this fight. First and foremost, that first round, I think Sara McMann's going to take it. It's almost, like I said, a question of what happens after that. But I don't think that Karol Rosa's on the level of your Ketlin Verheide. I don't think she's on the level of your Juliana Peñas, who's going to be able to take advantage of the McMann mistakes, should they happen, or if McMann tires or loses focus, concentration, anything like that. Rosa could take advantage of those, but I don't think it's as likely for her to take advantage than, like I've already said, Ketlin Verheide or a Juliana Peña. So I think that McMann's going to be able to take this fight to a decision, and I think that she might be able to squeeze 2 out of the 3 rounds. On the feet, Karol Rosa's going to absolutely light her up for sure, but like I've said before, with wrestlers, that forces them to shoot takedowns, and I think that once McMann does realise that it's a complete mismatch on the feet, the wrestling will start, and I do think she'll be able to wrestle her for at least 2 out of the 3 rounds. So like I said, it could be my bias towards wrestling and the fact that McMann is a solid wrestler. If Rosa doesn't capitalise on the mistakes, if they are there, the lack of concentration, if that does happen, then I think McMann wins this fight. So I'm picking Sara McMann to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is probably my favourite fight on the entire card. We've got David Dvorak versus Matheus Nicolau. And like I say, a phenomenal fight. I think that both fighters, you know, I spoke about the flyweight contention early on with Askarov and Kara France. I think the winner of this fight, if there's a convincing winner in this fight, if somebody finishes emphatically, I do think that they could potentially be only 1 fight away from a potential title shot themselves. And if the winner of this fight, should it be a finish, was to fight the loser of Askarov and Kara France, or potentially a Brandon Royval, then that wouldn't surprise me either. Like I said, I think it's a great fight. I do like Nicolau in this fight, though. Although Dvorak is dangerous and he has shown that he's got skills everywhere inside the cage, I just think that Nicolau has an edge in this fight. In the boxing, It's going to be close, but the thing is with Dvorak, he's very aggressive and he'll wing bombs and come forwards. Now, what that's going to allow Nicolau to do is going to allow him to counter. And this is the thing about Nicolau's boxing. Yes, his base is BJJ, but his boxing, he can fight moving backwards and moving forwards as well. And his counters are really good. So if Dvorak's coming forward, being ultra aggressive with the big bombs, the big punches, then Nicolau's going to be able to either counter that moving backwards, or he's going to be able to use that overly aggressive nature of Dvorak to actually shoot into a reactive takedown and take him down, where, like I say, Nicolau's base is in BJJ. So I think stylistically, Nicolau's got advantages. The one thing that Dvorak definitely does have is brutal low kicks. We saw that in the Jordan Espinosa fight. He kept on those low kicks and really messed his leg up. But guess what? Nicolau's got great low kicks as well. But the reason why we haven't seen it in the UFC in his second stint in the UFC is because he's fought Manel Kape, who was a southpaw. Tim Elliott, he's a southpaw, but he switches and his movement's really weird anyway, so actually timing low kicks on him would be borderline impossible. Nicolau hasn't had the opportunity to really get those low kicks in yet in this second stint in the UFC, but in this fight, he's fighting an orthodox stance in Dvorak, so the low kick battle is going to be super interesting in this fight as well, and I just feel that Nicolau's fought the better level of opponents. Look, Dvorak's good, but Jordan Espinosa and Ronda Ross on short notice, like 48 hours notice, compared to Manel Kape and Tim Elliott, you know. I think Nicolau's the slightly better striker, technically. He's got power in both hands. I think his wrestling's better. I think his jiu-jitsu's slightly better as well. And he's fought the better level of competition. I'm picking Matheus Nicolau to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Magny versus Max Griffin. I think this is a really well-matched fight, to be honest, and I'm glad the UFC have put it together, but I do think there's a strong edge on Magny here. Max Griffin's good, he'll stay in your face, he'll land bombs, he's developing and getting better each fight as well. He's also got knockout power. He's got wrestling in his back pocket, but everything that I've just mentioned, I feel that Magny is just going to outwork him. Magny doesn't have the power that Max Griffin has, granted, but Magny's technical striking's good. I believe this is going to be the big cage as well, with it being in Columbus, not in the Apex. So I think the range management, the distance management, being aware of danger and just dictating the pace of the fight all falls on Magny's plate. And I think if Magny even wants to take Max Griffin down, then he's got the wrestling advantage, the topside jiu-jitsu advantage as well. So I just think it's going to be a difficult fight for Max Griffin. Sure, Max Griffin could knock him out. Potentially, I don't think it's going to end in one shot, but, you know, hurting Magny, pushing him back against the cage and just landing a plethora of strikes, a combination on him and getting him out of there, it's a possibility, but I think it's a low percentage outcome. I think Magny's going to rack up volume here. I think he's going to look calm, comfortable, composed, and I think he's going to mix everything up. I think he's going to shoot takedowns. I think he's going to get on top of Griffin. The cardio is off the charts as well with Magny, so every box seems to be checked for Magny. I'm picking Magny to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Marc Diakiese versus Viacheslav Borschev. A really interesting fight, and before I get into the breakdown, for those that don't have an understanding of how athlete management works and how matchmaking works, I'm going to tell you exactly how this fight got put together. You know, obviously we manage Marc Diakiese at HD Fight Management, so it's as simple as Borschev. I heard rumours, I can't remember whether it was on the commentary or whether it was on Twitter from some media outlet, but someone was calling Borschev the new Kevin Holland in regards to blagging Sean Shelby, being on him constantly. I want to fight, I want to fight, I want to fight. And guess what? That's exactly what we were doing with Marc Diakiese. We felt that Marc didn't really go out and show what he needed to show against Rafael Alves because it ended so quickly. So we were blagging Sean Shelby on it. Sean Shelby, we want another fight as quick as possible. Well, guess what? Sean Shelby just put both fighters together because both management teams were just getting on at him that they wanted a fight. Makes perfect sense, and that's as simple as it gets. But straight into the fight and how it plays out. Borschev hits like a truck. That's number one, the first thing that Marc's got to be careful of in this fight. The fact that it's deceptive as well. He throws these punches out and it doesn't look like there's much behind him, but man, he hits like a truck. But outside of that, I think Marc's got a lot of stylistic advantages in this fight. I don't think Borschev is the type of fighter to come out hard, fast, like a bull. So what Marc's going to have is somebody that allows, an opponent that allows his opponent to get into their range, which is perfect for Marc because I think he's got a speed advantage, I think he's got a movement advantage and an athleticism advantage as well. So with Borschev allowing his opponents to be able to dictate the range of the fight, and he will react once they're in his range, I think works perfectly for Marc. Marc's technical striking's good. People forget that he went competitively 3 rounds with Rafael Fiziev, who is an absolute monster. I'm with Marc most days. I've seen him sparring against world-class Muay Thai guys, world-class kickboxers, and Marc's a good technical striker, so is Borschev. I think the technical aspect is very close in this fight. It's just Borschev hits like a truck. However, the interesting aspect of this fight is from the wrestling and grappling scenario. I think Marc's the better wrestler. I think that Borschev has been able to get back up to his feet. I think he makes a couple of mistakes whilst doing that, showing his back, turning the wrong way, and standing up in the wrong ways, but he's been able to get away with it because he's not fought a higher level competition enough to be able to capitalize on those mistakes, if that makes sense. But I think that Marc is definitely the best fighter that Borshev's ever fought. I think if Marc does take Borschev down, which Borschev gets taken down in pretty much every fight, I think Marc will be able to keep him down for long periods of time on the mat. It's just a question of, does Marc get caught by Borschev? Because Borschev, like I've said now, this is the 3rd time I've said it, he hits like a truck. So if any fighter gets clipped by Borschev, it's going to be trouble, it's going to be danger, and you're probably getting knocked out. But outside of that knockout, I think Marc's got plenty of advantages in this fight in regards to the speed, the movement, the athleticism, dictating the pace and the range of the fight, and then being able to mix some wrestling in and using topside jiu-jitsu. So for those reasons, I'm picking Marc Diakiese to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Luis Saldana versus Bruno Souza. A really good fight, a striking battle. It's going to take place on the feet. I'd be shocked if there was wrestling and grappling, or at least wrestling and grappling that had an effect on the outcome of the fight. Bruno Souza, he's not your typical Brazilian that's, a BJJ phenom. Bruno Souza's got this karate style, much like Wonderboy, sideways stance. And Saldana's a good kickboxer himself. I just think Saldana is the slightly better fighter though here. I think he's going to have more volume. He's got more variety to his strikes. Bruno Souza tends to take a little bit of time off as well. We saw in the Bagdasarian fight that he allowed Bagdasarian to lead a lot of the time. When Saldana's leading, he's so good moving forwards. Moving backwards is when you can get Saldana. His defense is a little bit sketchy, but Bruno Souza, he's not one of these ultra aggressive fighters that's going to constantly be in your face and be stinging you with hard shots, hard punches, hard combinations. He's a fighter that is patient, and training with Lyoto Machida, he does allow pressure to come on himself and then reacts to it. But with Luis Saldana, he's going to be able to have that distance management in this fight, gauge the range, be able to strike when he wants, move out when he wants. And I think Saldana's just going to be able to outwork Bruno Souza over the course of 3 rounds. If there is a finish, I do think it would more likely to be Saldana, but if not, like I said, I think Saldana will win 2 out of the 3 rounds just by sheer volume and just landing good strikes. So I'm picking Luis Saldana to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Danaa Batgerel versus Chris Gutierrez. This fight is phenomenal. I can't wait for it. I'm a massive fan of Danaa Batgerel. I think he's a really good fighter. I've cashed on him previously as well. And I think that Chris Gutierrez is in for a rough night, if I'm being honest. However, the one neutralizer that Chris Gutierrez has got is that low calf kick. That low calf kick's dangerous, but Danaa Batgerel is one of these fighters that he just looks hard. He looks solid, and it looks like he's the type of fighter that when you kick him, it hurts you just as much as it hurts him. I think Gutierrez has got an opportunity with the low kicks if he can get him hurt early, but outside of that, I think Danaa Batgerel's pressure, his timing as well, and his composure inside heated exchanges when they're both in boxing range swinging punches. Danaa Batgerel's just got this calm, composed aura about him where it looks like he sees everything in slow motion, reacts perfectly and lands good shots. I think that Chris Gutierrez is going to get stung in this fight, whether he gets knocked out or not. I'm not totally sold on, but if Danaa Batgerel knocks him out, I'm not going to be shocked either. But I think Danaa Batgerel is just going to be able to land some nice, significant strikes on Gutierrez. He's just got to be careful of that low kick coming back at him. And if he is careful about that, it's a fight that I believe is going to be won and lost on the feet. And Danaa Batgerel is just a better technical striker with more power, better combinations, better timing, better precision. For those reasons, I'm picking Danaa Batgerel to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is a good one. We've got Jennifer Maia versus Manon Fiorot. Manon Fiorot is, the prospect everybody's talking about. She's the future champion that people think she is, and I agree with it. I genuinely, I bought into the hype. I think she's good. I think she's getting better each time we see her. Jennifer Maia is going to be a really, really good test for her though, but also a good win on her record should she win. I think that Jennifer Maia is going to make this fight competitive. I don't think she's going to be, getting put out or getting dominated like the previous opponents of Firo. I think that this is a massive step up for Firo in regards to level of competition. But I do think Firo's, going to be fine in this fight. I think she's going to be able to be aggressive. I think she's going to force Maia backwards. She's going to be forcing takedowns from Maia. I think she can defend the takedowns. And when Maia's trying to take her down, she's actually in the wheelhouse of Firo because of the Muay Thai game, the elbows, the knees. She loves to be in close. So stylistically, I think it's a tough fight for Jennifer Maia. If she tries to strike with Firo, I think she's going to get outstruck. And if she tries to wrestle with Firo, she might be able to take her down once or twice. But Firo, I think, will be able to get back up to her feet. And then when they're in close quarters, Maia will have just closed the distance for Firo with that wrestling game plan with those takedowns. So Firo's just going to be able to land those elbows and knees against her. And I think it's going to be a tough fight for Jennifer Maia. I'm not going to be overly surprised if Maia was to squeeze something out here, but I do think it's going to be difficult for her stylistically. Firo's got advantages, significant advantages, and also I think that the quality of Firo is definitely there. I'm picking my known Firo to win this fight. And finally, we've got Askar Khizriev versus Denis Tiuliulin. And this is an interesting fight, to say the least. Denis Tiuliulin's a madman, comes in there, swings wild bombs, looks to take you out, and he's got power. Listen, when he lands, he hurts his opponents, he drops them, he'll knock them out, and he's got no problems exchanging inside boxing range. He loves it. He seems like he lives for that exchange inside of boxing range. But Khizriev, hopefully we actually get to see this fight. Khizriev's been scheduled now like 2 or 3 times, maybe more, to fight in the UFC, and unfortunately his opponents keep dropping out, pulling out, or something happens with the fight. But I really hope we get to see this debut here, because Khizriev's a really good fighter. His striking is good, but his speed and his volume is the bit where I've got a few question marks over him. But aside from that, he's got bombs, he looks to close the distance, he looks to take you down now. The problem with Denis Tiuliulin, what we've seen in his previous fights, is he is able to be taken down. You can get him down, you can control him on the mat as well, and ultimately I think that's where this fight's going to head. I think that Khizriev probably isn't going to want anything of these wild exchange bombs that are going to be coming from Denis Tiuliulin. And because of that, I just think the wrestling is going to be the focal part of Khizriev's game plan here. I think he's going to get in on the legs. I think he is going to score plenty of takedowns. And I think after 2, 3, 4 takedowns, and after maybe a round and a half, I think that Tiuliulin's morale's going to sort of start sinking a little bit, knowing the fact that he can't let anything go because he's getting taken down. And if he tries to be overly aggressive, he's just going to make it easier for Khizriev to take him down. I think it's going to be one of those fights where Tiuliulin's going to definitely be fun watching later down the line. I think he's definitely going to get wins and knockouts in the UFC, but right now against Khizriev, I think Khizriev's on a different level, and with the stylistic advantages he has with the wrestling and the top side grappling, I think Khizriev's going to have more than enough to be able to either ground and pound Tiuliulin the longer the fight goes on, submit him the longer the fight goes on, or if it does go to a decision, I think Khizriev could probably take all 3 rounds relatively comfortably as well. So I'm picking Askar Khizriev to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. Thank you all for listening. As always, I appreciate all the likes to the video, all the subscriptions to our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/MMAplay365. And as for the comments, always drop comments if you've got any thoughts on the fights, if you've got any opinions. I do try and get back to the comments, and if you want a conversation, you can have that there with me on our YouTube channel. I appreciate the support. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you again next week.